Hi everyone. We're going to go over chapter 14 and focus on supply chain management, marketing channels and marketing channel management, logistics, and throw in a few legal issues related to channel management. This all has to do with the P of place, the 4 P's of marketing. You could also call it distribution. We first look at supply chain, and this is a relatively new term. We used to call it materials management back in the day, mostly in the United States, but it was coined by a British logistician named Keith Oliver, among other people, back in the early 80s, and we kind of adopted it. So what you have here is a flow, both forwards and backwards, of material and information from the suppliers, and that supplier could be a raw material supplier, a sub-assembly supplier, or it could be the final good that gets to a company that plans on distributing it, and that could be a lot of different variations, which is transported to what you would call a reseller. It could be a retailer, it could be a distributor, it could be someone down the street in a little mom and pop shop, and finally to us. And us could be the consumer or some sort of industrial customer. So you'll notice the flows of both material and information. They're not designated as such, but you'll have to trust me. Flow of materials, whatever they might be, steel, cars, ball bearings, apples, to the customer, but there's also information and materials perhaps coming back to all these different areas. I'm going to show you another example in a moment, but trust me to say that information and materials will flow both ways in a supply chain configuration. I wanted to point out this term called reverse logistics, which happens to be where the material and information flows backwards. I'll give you an example. I own a Dell computer, have for a long time, and that Dell computer sometimes gets messed up. So I have a service contract with them where they will send a technician to my house and attempt to fix it. Well, I've had 2 issues with it since purchasing it a few years ago. Both times the technician did come out and could not fix the problem. So what did they do? They had me ship the product back, gave me the box, had me go to FedEx, or they could have came in to my house and picked it up, but I thought I'd just take it there. And then FedEx would ship it to some maintenance facility in Louisville, Kentucky, where they repaired it very quickly and sent it right back. So it was, the material was going in reverse, so to speak, and then came back to me. So when you have supply chain management, that's managing these upstream suppliers, downstream customers, value-added flows of material, final goods, and related information among the suppliers, company, resellers, and final consumers. When you talk about logistics, there are several components to it, or supply chain, I should say. Distribution, making sure the product is available in all shapes and forms. Supply chain, which we kind of talk about, that whole idea of those members that need to be managed. And it could be one manager, so to speak, or multiple managers, depending on how many members are in the channel. Procurement, That means finding suppliers that can provide you with those raw materials, components, finished goods, working a system so that you can buy those materials for a certain price and get them on a certain time at a certain level of quality. And then last but not least, if it is something that can be recycled, working with them to make sure that it takes them off your hands. I'll give you an example of that. Kind of this idea of reverse logistics. We own an Nespresso coffee maker. It uses pods, and Nespresso will provide you with a bag that you can put the used pods in, and at no cost to you, have them shipped via UPS back to the supplier, Nespresso. And what they would do with them, I'm not sure. There's enough tin in there for them to recycle and make additional pods. So hopefully it's a little bit more sustainable, less impact on the environment. And then last but not least, logistics management, which is really the flow of material, goods, and information. And like I said, we'll get into a couple of these in a little bit more detail. So let's take a look at an example of a supply chain. So here you have cereal. Okay, this is straight from the book, where the farmer grows the wheat, the grain, the whatever. You could also consider the people that make the sugar cane and whatever else goes into Frosted Flakes. Old Tony the Tiger here. They go to the company, in this particular case Kellogg's, Battle Creek, and other facilities, and they make cereal out of it. Now, that's just the cereal part, but as you can see here, that they have to put that cereal in something, a bag within a box, and there's a lot of printing and so on. So there's a mini supply chain here where it may start with a company that produces some sort of paper, a lumber company, and that converts the lumber into paperboard through corrugated, and also paper for manufacturing the labels, and it gets into this area, the packaging. So supplies are coming in not only from the farmer, but also a producer of labels and paperboard. Then it gets processed into this wonderful little box, and then gets distributed to many different outlets, grocery stores like Kroger's, superstores like Meijer's or Walmart Supercenters, or perhaps something a little BP gas outlet down the street. Okay, and then finally it gets to you and me. But as you can see, that's just one part of the product. The information will flow back from any or all of these particular members of the supply chain. Sales information, supply information, quality information, and so on. Now, around COVID time, there was a run on a lot of different products because people were afraid to go out, but they had to go out to get something to eat. Restaurants were shut down, so a lot of stuff was done in the house, cooking and so on. So what happened was there would be a run on certain products, whether it's cereal, toilet paper, other toiletries, water. So what would happen is the information flow would get back to the producers, and the demand was in such high level that they would produce and perhaps overproduce, creating this huge spike of inventory. Well, you had fluctuations in what consumers wanted, and then you had this lull of demand, but you still had the inventory. But then all of a sudden you get another spike for some other reason, maybe fear that the pandemic wasn't going away, and you would get this up and down sawtooth, almost like a bullwhip. If you can imagine a whip that someone cracks, it kind of has these wavy flows to it. And this is what they call the bullwhip effect, where suppliers order so much of something to try to stem off a high level of demand. And it's not only the suppliers, but everybody that uses the supplier, that goes into the supply, whether it's cereal, whether it's computers, whether it's toilet paper. So you have this effect throughout the supply chain until things settle down. And then they kind of did. I mean, currently, I think that the biggest issue with the bullwhip effect is housing. They just can't make enough houses, and there's still an unsatisfied demand out there, and then perhaps there might be a glut in real estate, and then you don't have anybody that wants to buy it, or maybe they can't buy it because the prices are so high. So you have, like I said, this is called the bullwhip effect. Okay, now I wanted to kind of go through something that relates to the concept of marketing channels. So you have a couple definitions here. Marketing channel: a group of individuals and organizations that direct the flow of finished products from producers to consumers. All right. And then you also have something called marketing intermediaries, middlemen that link producers to other intermediaries or ultimate consumers through contractual arrangements or through the purchase and resale of products. Okay. So these are called marketing channels, both for some consumer as well as industrial goods or services. The components in here, all of them, are called channel members. Okay? And what you have here are these levels, where the level is the number of channel members between the original producer of the product and the final user or the consumer. Or over here, the original producer of the industrial good, material, whatever, to the industrial customer. So imagine this. Let's say you're hungry for an apple. Well, at a base level, you could go to an orchard and buy that apple, right? Buy a bushel of them, straight off the tree. Maybe you'll allow to pick them. Okay, that's basically a zero level channel. Or you could go to a store, a Kroger, a Myers, somebody down the street, and buy that apple. That's from a retailer. But now, that retailer may not be the size of a Kroger or a Safeway or an Albertsons. They may be a little bit smaller, and they may go to what you call a wholesaler. And that wholesaler will provide the retailer not just maybe with apples, but with a whole bunch of different fruits and vegetables. So the retailer is going to work with the wholesaler, who provides, like I said, many different varieties of fruits and vegetables, sells them to the retailer, and then eventually to you. And you even have another, what we call third level, because you have three intermediaries here, where the wholesale will have this fine selection, but then you may have somebody called a jobber that perhaps delivers and maybe buys a few things to really small retailers. Okay, and so they go through another one. Same thing happens in industrial situations. If you're big enough, you may be able to buy whatever straight from the manufacturer. Okay, so if you're buying jet airplanes, or if you're buying a heck of a lot of big mainframes or client server computers, you may go directly to an IBM. You may go directly to an Apple or a Dell. But if you're not one of these big boys or girls, perhaps you're going to go through what you might call an industrial distributor. And this distributor will take possession of goods, just like a wholesaler will, and then sell them to customers. One of the most well-known industrial distributor that we see if we drive down certain avenues is called Grainger. They are MRO, Material Repair and Operations, and they sell all kind of different things to industrial customers, anywhere from tools to toilet paper to lanterns. But they will take possession of the goods and sell to those. They have a whole wide range, so you can just go there in one-stop shop. Then you have these other derivations where you have people called manufacturers representatives, or a larger group, manufacturer sales branch. These do not take possession of the goods, unlike a distributor or, of course, the manufacturer, but rather they get paid a commission to sell specific items from the manufacturers. I can give you an example from my past. I worked for Huffy Bicycles, and we had inside sales people that took orders over the phone from big companies. We had a sales staff, a small sales staff, that worked with specific retailers, but we also sold our bikes through manufacturers' representatives and manufacturer sales branches that did not take possession of the bicycles, but worked with some local businesses that sold bikes, hobby stores and so on, that they knew very, very well. They relieved us the burden of knowing these customers well, but our responsibility was to get the bicycles to these smaller companies who the manufacturer representatives could sell to. They would get paid a commission by us, but we didn't have to pay any salary or overhead. Okay, so there was a cost savings. They made their money on commission, and commission, again, that's money you make off of a sale, a certain percentage, and they represented us very well. So you can see there are different types of ways to get product. Now, let me just throw in a couple of these legal things. Something called a tie-in agreement, an agreement in which a supplier furnishes a product to a channel member with a stipulation that the channel member must purchase other products as well. Sometimes this is legal, sometimes it's not legal. But so if you're going to buy one thing, the manufacturer or the distributor says, you know what, if you're going to buy this, you need to buy these other things too. It's part of the deal. An exclusive dealer or dealing, a situation in which a manufacturer forbids an intermediary from carrying products of competing manufacturers, is very common. And one of the most common ones of that is a distributor of alcoholic beverages, beer, wine, or whatever. So if you're a Anheuser-Busch InBev distributor, certainly you're not going to sell Miller products or Coors products. You're going to sell only Anheuser-Busch InBev products if you want to be a distributor for them. Now, if you're a grocery store, you don't have that kind of exclusive dealing. What you will sell is everything you can get your hands on. But that's kind of the nature of that particular environment. Think about this for a moment. Let's say that you wanted to buy groceries, all right? And imagine that you had to go to a bakery to get your bread, a farmer's market to get fruits and vegetables, a poultry farm for chicken, a meat producer for a steak, a pharmacy for toiletries, and so on. Imagine you had to go through all these producers of those goods and buy these things. So you'd have to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different stops or different contact points just to get what you need. This is what it would look like, a spider web. Very complex, very inefficient. Well, an intermediary provides utility so that you don't have to do all that. Time utility, having the products available when you need them. Place utility, having them where you need them. Possession, having them available in a way that you can purchase them, whether through credit or cash. And last but not least, in the form that you want. In other words, you don't want to buy 5,000 apples, you just want to buy 1 or 2. So that's what they do. So instead of going to all these places to get your food and toiletries, you go to one place. You go to a Kroger. Kroger has the responsibility of working with all the suppliers, whether the direct manufacturers or producers or intermediaries like wholesalers or agents. It all gets to a nice grocery store, and then all you have to do is go in there and buy everything you need at one place. So you can see the value added with an intermediary. And that value is distributed or presented in many different ways. I won't go through all of these, but this is where the money comes in. Intermediaries will offer some, if not all of these. Now, when we talk to about wholesalers and retailers in another chapter, I'll get more into this, but think about it. An intermediary could store the product, so you don't have to. You just go buy it. You don't have to store it. If it's like a car dealership, you could finance through them. They'll get the car from the manufacturers, the Fords, the GMs, the Hondas. They take risks by carrying the inventory, not only the risk of the inventory being damaged, but the inventory sitting around if no one wants it, obsolescence. They can provide you with information on what the best buy is. They can help negotiate the sale. They can even promote the product. They give you a source of contact, and so on. So this is value add, and like I said, not every intermediary can do all these things, only the largest ones, but the smaller ones can do and maybe specialize in some of these. You have companies that all they do is finance, especially if you're in real estate. You can go to a lot of different places and get a loan for a house. It's not just a bank, it could be these other, and that's all they're going to do. They don't own the house, but they can provide you with excellent financing options. If you're a consumer or an industrial consumer, you need to choose which channel you want to do business with. And there's a lot of different variables that come into place. What are you looking for? Are you looking for large quantities of a product? Are you looking for the product to be sold to you in bulk? Or do you want it broken down into individual pieces or units? Do you want to provide your company with something that's totally unique, that differentiates itself from the competition, even though it could be the same product? Should it be packaged differently? Should it be labeled differently? Are you a large organization where you can deal with many, many ones, or you just want to deal with one particular channel member? Okay, so all these things take into account why you would want to choose your channel members wisely. Like I said, if you can go directly to the manufacturer and you are large enough that you can service one another, that's fine. But if you're just a small fry, perhaps you're going to have to go through several different distributors to get what you want, and then hopefully they're going to be able to provide you with that. So chances are, if you're a small company dealing with directly with a manufacturer and don't really do that much business with them, you're probably not going to get the same kind of service if one of your competitors or another similar products is 50 times as large as you. They're going to probably get better service. It's just the nature of how business works. Okay, I want to talk a little bit now about some other type of decisions. And one is the type of distribution intensity. And this kind of parallels with this idea of product classification that we learned in chapter 11. In other words, for a convenience item, chances are you're going to want to have intense distribution. So Coca-Cola will sell its products at restaurants, at grocery stores, at supercenters. They'll sell them at Lowe's or Home Depot. They'll sell them anywhere that someone wants to buy something if they have thirst. And of course, they sell them in vending machines. So anywhere you can get this in front of the consumer will lead to intensive distribution. And again, mostly convenience items. For shopping items where you have to spend a little bit more time and you don't have as many choices, you would probably recommend or want selective distribution. I have Cabela's over here. Of course, Cabela's is sporting goods. Not every retailer sells sporting goods. There's a lot, but certainly not as much as you would find Coca-Cola. So what do? For a shopping product, you have to work a little bit harder, do some research, and then go to the distributor that provides you with that item. Selective distribution. And last but not least, if it is a very exclusive item, in other words, more of a specialty good, which you're just not going to find anywhere, and you have to probably put in a lot of effort and work with several people to get it, you may have to use exclusive distribution. I have some Air Yeezys here, which isn't something that you're going to be able to pick up anywhere at any kind of shoe store, like a DSW. You probably have to either get them custom made or go through a very limited distributorship. So you have intensive, selective, exclusive, that kind of matches convenience, shopping, as well as specialty goods. This kind of depicts a relationship between cost per transaction and the value out of the sale, where you start here, and anything that you can do on your own or provide a consumer where they can order it on their own would lead to a low value, low cost. In other words, if you're wanting to buy candy bars or golf balls or perhaps earphones, you probably don't need that much help. You can go do web, e-commerce, telemarketing, not so much anymore, or just go to the store and buy it. All right, not too much action is taking place in here, and usually the cost of these are pretty limited. But as you get more complexity in the product or service, chances are you're going to need assistance with some people that are very specialized in selling those products, technical people, marketing people. You're selling jet airplanes, chances are you're going to be needing a whole sales team to provide the airlines with a lot of information on how to either sell or lease that equipment. So the cost per transaction is going to be extraordinarily high, but the value add is going to be high as well, because you're going to have some very specialized, very important people here to help make that sale happen. Okay, so the lower the value of the item is going to have lower cost, lower value. The higher, just the opposite. Now let's talk a little bit about different types of distribution systems. And what I'm going to show you here are 3 different types, as well as what you call conflict management among these different systems. So what I've showed you here off to the left is what you would call a conventional vertical system. And vertical because it's up and down, right? So here, this kind of mimics one of the marketing channel that we just looked at. So again, let's take apples. You have a producer that's a farmer. Perhaps you have a wholesaler that gets apples and pears and celery and lettuce. And then you have a retailer that buys from this wholesaler those things. And then finally it gets to us. These people in a conventional channel system will act separately. They are in it for themselves. Of course, they need customers, but they want to make sure they maximize profits on their terms. So they really only work together from a transaction standpoint. Over here, on the other hand, you have something called a vertical marketing system. And what this depicts is that these producers, retailers, wholesalers, who's ever in the channel member system will work with one another a lot closely. They may share information systems. They may even share employees. I think I had mentioned about the idea of JIT2, where you have suppliers working in the manufacturing system, even though they're not a manufacturing company, even though they don't necessarily are employed by them. They really intermesh here. And finally it gets down to the consumer, which could be industrial or like I said, you and me, consumers. The thing here, though, is that you may have 1 or 2 of these channel members, intermediaries, that are very powerful, and they are called the channel captain. So if you were to go to a company like Walmart, they are huge, billions and billions and billions of dollars in sales and profits every year. Global, Sam's, Walmart, and a lot of other different companies that provide them with revenue. They are so huge that they command, almost set the price that has to be obeyed by a supplier, especially delivery terms, quality terms, quantity terms. So you would call them a channel captain. P&G, Procter & Gamble, would also be the channel captain. They're the ones that are probably, and again, these are these are retailers that's a producer. The channel captain for Walmart, they're the retailer, but the producer could be P&G, where they can call the shots. Another one where they could call the shots, the supplier, would be maybe NVIDIA. Of course, they make a lot of different things, graphic processing units for one, because there's not too many of them around that can produce at that level. They kind of have to call the shots. You want it when? This is when we'll give it to you at this price if you want these parts and components. And last but not least, once I get the thing, you have something called a horizontal marketing system. And I am sure that in your past you have seen or went to a grocery store, maybe a Kroger, and you saw a bank that was not affiliated with Kroger, but a bank nonetheless. Maybe you'll go to a Walmart and all of a sudden you'll see a little Sleezers or a Subway. And you're thinking, well, what's going on here? These are examples of horizontal marketing systems. Both companies, even though they're not owned by each other, can benefit by combining efforts and offering products or services in the same facility. Again, you go to a BP, you go to a Speedway, sometimes you'll have like I said, a Subway, a Little Caesars, a Domino's in that same facility working together. Now, on a larger scale, here is one that, for any of you who have flown internationally, there is something called Star Alliance. And Star Alliance consists of these 25 different airlines. Again, almost all of them are international. They serve almost 2,000 airports, or 1,200 airports, excuse me, but they share systems, they share perhaps gate facilities and gate employees. If there's a problem with one, maybe an overbooking, they will try to get you on another one of the same, within the same alliance. So they are competing with one another, but at the same time they are sharing resources so that they all benefit. Okay, and the only one that's kind of, I guess, local would be United. But the point is that they work with one another. That would be called a horizontal marketing system. Unfortunately, everybody just can't get along. So you have what they call conflict. So let me give you a couple examples. There are 3 types of conflict, channel conflict. The first one is horizontal, occurs among firms at the same level within the channel. I have Little Caesars as an example. This is where you have somebody at the same level, like I said, horizontal, selling a product either below or above the price of another. Now, I experienced this personally. At one time, Little Caesars was selling a $5 pizza, and this was in most places in Ohio, northern Ohio, actually before you got to the border of Michigan on Lewis Avenue. Some of you know where this is. So in Ohio, you could get a $5 Little Caesars pizza, pepperoni and cheese, large. You drive across the border and you saw a similar store, Little Caesars, that was selling it for $5.50, and they were getting away with it. Why? Because apparently that population there didn't either know about a $5 pizza or didn't care, and it was more convenient for them to shop and get the $5.50 pizza. So for every pizza, they were making 50 cents more than the one in Ohio. So the one in Ohio probably was thinking, you know what, why can't we sell it at $5.50? The franchisor, the ones that these people bought them the franchises from, said, that's fine. If you can get sales, sell it for what you want. That's horizontal conflict. Vertical conflict occurs between different levels of the same channel. So in vertical conflict, you may have, again, up and down, you may have one particular, let's say a supplier to Apple computers that is not getting paid the same for their componentry or packaging or whatever as another. And they say, wait a second now, why aren't we getting the same amount of money as our competitors? Because usually you have more than one supplier, unless you have a sole supplier situation, or it's you're buying from a company that has a monopoly on that material. That could provide conflict. Up and down, or perhaps Apple is selling their product at one particular retailer, or them selling themselves, and so you have somebody selling the final good that's not associated with Apple, but they bought the product, and Apple is maybe selling it directly from them. Now here, multi-channel conflict is similar, but the example I'm going to give is perhaps Nike selling their goods right off their website, but then you have a Nike store that's selling the same goods at their retailer. So you're thinking, well, I could either buy it online and not have to go to the store and have it shipped, or I could go to the store and buy it there. So that could result in some conflict, especially if your store was responsible for a certain amount of profit and loss. And you're thinking, wait a second, the mother company is selling it online, so it's more convenient for them. Okay, the last thing we want to cover is something called logistics. And to do that, I want to play a very short commercial from UPS.
Logistics makes the world work better.
When it's planes in the sky for a chain of supply, that's logistics. When the parts for the line come precisely on time, that's logistics. A continuous link that is always in sync, that's logistics. Carbon footprint reduced, bottom line gets a boost, that's logistics. With new ways to compete, there'll be cheers on Wall Street, that's logistics. When technology knows right where everything goes, that's logistics. Bells will ring, ring-a-ding, 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 that's logistics. There will be no more stress 'cause you called UPS, that's logistics.
So logistics makes the world go round, as they say, and you'll see several components within logistics. It used to be a marketing function, well, more supply chain, but sometimes it is considered part of marketing. It's in the text, but it's still a matter of how do you get one item, raw material, subcomponent through the system and then to the consumer. So several things, as I said, are involved. One of them has to do with transportation. And in this table that you have listed in the textbook, you'll see the different modes of transportation: railroad, trucks, pipelines, waterways, and airplanes. Those are the main ones. There might be some niche players. Ranked according to their cost, speed, dependability, load flexibility, accessibility, frequency, and products carried. So for instance, if you were to take pipelines, well, the cost is very low, at least the cost of moving items. And what are those items? Basically gas or some sort of liquid. Now, the infrastructure is very high to build it, but once it's built, the variable costs are extremely low. The downside of pipelines, of course, is that your load flexibility is low too. In other words, you can only ship gas, liquids, and so on. So you can't transport much, and accessibility is very limited because there's only a certain amount of pipelines around. Versus airplanes, where the cost is extremely high. You can get somewhere, the product there very fast, and they're pretty dependable, except your load flexibility is so-so. You can't have huge items on an airplane. Probably the one that gets the most use are trucks. The cost is high relative to the other modes, but the speed is fast, or at least moderately fast. The dependability is very high. Load flexibility is average. There's a lot more you can put on a truck than about anything else. Waterways and railroads might be the only difference. I can put more on. And it's used quite a bit. So it depends on what you're shipping, how quickly you need to get there, and the cost. So we go back into here, we also have something called materials handling. And this could be anything from a forklift to a radio frequency automatic retrieval storage system. So the idea of product moving from one point within a distribution center or warehouse, or even a manufacturing center, where you're bringing in steel rods to be bent, painted into bicycles, is part of MH. Then you have warehousing, and within warehousing, it's also distribution centers. So this is where the product is stored, perhaps within hours until it's moved again, or several days, hopefully no more than a year, or your inventory turnover is shot. So this is where you could have, again, automation, systems that you could use barcodes or radio frequency to locate and get the items to a material handling system to get them onto a truck or stored. Logistics information. This is more or less the planning part. And it starts with something called the SOP, Sales and Operations Planning, where you're looking out 6 to 8 to 10 months, 12 months, maybe even 2 years, figuring out what your sales are going to be, whether they're sales from a backlog that you've already occurred and just have to be built, or from a forecast, or a combination. You then have to figure out, do you have the resources to build, store the product, which is, of course, related to capacity. What kind of inventory do you have on hand? What kind of inventory do you need? And then can the product be made to satisfy, like I said, the forecasts or the actual orders? And last but not least, inventory management. And this is a matter of planning the right amount of inventory, whether it's raw materials, work in process, or finished goods, or finished sub-assemblies. And although a lot of this stuff is very boring, I did it all. Very rewarding. There is stress to it, but nowadays, with many different systems involved, one being ERP, enterprise-wide planning, it makes the job, I won't say easier, but it makes it less stressful. And so I'm going to show you one final commercial that kind of makes logistics, inventory management, information, production planning kind of spices it up.